How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to another video on the channel. In this video I'm going to be adding an aesthetic mod to this C5 Corvette that I am building up. If you're not familiar with this car, this is my primary project car that I've been working on over the past few years, fixing it up, rebuilding it, modifying it, making it my own, and customizing it also with a bunch of different 3D printed parts. And so one of the things I've been wanting to add onto the car are some just aesthetic aero pieces. Not really functional, just add some, additional aftermarket kind of customized aesthetics to this car. And so in another video I recorded, I showed you guys installing a front splitter for this car. And so in this video, just for the sake of splitting things up and not making an enormously long video, I'm going to be installing the complementing side skirts. So these pieces are all from a company I partnered with called Extreme Online Store, or EOS for short, and they sent me out these pieces to kind of review, install, and just kind of give you guys my overall look and feel and impressions on. And from the get-go, just to give you kind of a spoiler alert, I am really happy overall with these things. There's a few minor points that I think could make these even better than they already are, but for the price point that you pay for these things, it's pretty remarkable, that you just get these. And I did opt for the plastic ones, which I'll talk about why a little bit later here in part of the video. But to start off, I got the car jacked up. For the side skirt install, you do need to get the car off the ground completely. You might be able to jack the rear of the car high enough up, but I just jacked up all four corners because I was doing the front splitter install as well. But you definitely need the rear jacked up because you have to take, or I should say it's a lot easier to install these with the rear tires off the car. So I got them unboxed, and kind of here's the kind of overview of the pieces. It's an unfinished kind of matte satin ABS plastic material. Overall quality of the piece is great. It comes with all of the holes pre-drilled, so you don't have to guess where you need to install your fasteners. All of the trim lines for the tool are really nice and clean. No rough edges where after they pop these things out of the mold that they use when they make them. So all the edges were super clean. And so just kind of giving you guys now a look of the car stock before these go on. Nothing wrong with the car, but just trying to add a little bit more pizzazz and flair to it. Again, these are not functionally aesthetic, or that's oxymoron there. These are not functional aero pieces. They are aesthetic only. And I think it's, there's a lot of aesthetic aero pieces throughout many cars. I mean, heck, the side vents on the fender vents on the front fenders on these cars are fake. And that's something I'm working on making not fake. So yeah, I'm excited to add these pieces to give the car just a little bit more of a personalized look. But overall, again, the quality of these are great, especially for the price point. Holes are pre-drilled, edges are clean, material feels sturdy for being a relatively thin plastic. So yeah, that's a great thing to know before buying these things. So, taking the wheels off the car, nothing special here. If you've worked on a car, hopefully you've taken the wheels off before. Otherwise, you should probably watch a different YouTube video first. And also how to safely jack up your car. When you're jacking up your car, never just use the hydraulic jack. Just a public service reminder and announcement. Always use jack stands with the jack there to support it in the event the car slips off the jack stands. So, taking the rear tires off, and also when you jack up the car, give it a good shimmy and shake. Once you get on the jack stands, make sure it's not easily going to slip off. So got the rear tires off. So one thing to note is that these pieces come with like a little bit of a rear wheel well flare out, and that's how the rear part of the side skirt you can theoretically mount this whole thing to just the bottom side of the car, but it would look a little weird. So this kind of helps blend the side skirt into the rear wheel well. So after watching some other people install this product and similar products, I saw them install this kind of rear flare-out piece first, and then that kind of helps them to set the placement and alignment for the main side skirt piece. So what I'm doing first here is I'm getting it fit up onto the rear, or front of the rear wheel well, I should say. Marked it with a Sharpie, and then I'm drilling some really small holes to just get started. You're drilling into fiberglass here, so you don't want to splinter and crack it, so you just want to go slow. And then I'm reaming out the holes on the piece themselves because I am not using supplied hardware. This kit comes with all self-tapping screws. I'm choosing to use rivets in certain areas. I think the rivets are just a lot more sturdy and they will just hold up better. I do use self-tapping screws when I install these. I don't use the ones that came with the kit, which I'll get into once I get to that part in the video. But for this part, I just used a 3/8 rivet, or no, sorry, not a 3/8, that's way too big. What size was this? 3/16 diameter rivet, and with an extra wide head so that it doesn't, you know, kind of compress and stress the plastic, because it is just plastic. So the wide head helps to distribute some of that point load from the rivet as you're driving it in. So just got all the rivets in place, drilled the hole slightly undersized to the rivet size, and then popped these rivets in. And I was doing this around when my son was napping, and his bedroom shares a wall with the garage, and the rivet gun is pretty loud when the rivets pop and snap. So I had to kind of strategically do this based on the time of the day. Life of a parent with a little one. But so then I went and got started on the other side, drilling all the small holes, all the things that I could do when things were a little bit more quiet, or that are a little bit more quiet. And then reaming these holes up to the approximate size needed for the rivets. So I did that. And then the other thing too is just, you know, kind of little minor nuance thing as I clean the area, get all the dirt and grime off. So this one I had a little oopsie. I misdrilled the hole. It happens. I lined up the part as best I could, and then I realized the rivet is going to collide with the kind of outer flange. So what I did was I got some big wire cutters or side angle cutters, and I chopped half of the head of the rivet off, and then now it sits nice and flush. So if that happens to you, just take a big wire cutter or side angle cutters and do the same thing. So once you got that installed, which I'll be installing the rivets here in a second, then you can move on to actually putting on the main side skirt piece. And the 2 points that are kind of these oblong holes are used to mount the side skirt using an existing kind of screw that holds the lower rocker panel to the car. So my advice is, so there's the rear one towards the rear of the car, and then all the way up here, this is the one that mounts the fender to the car, is take those out and you mount the side skirt roughly in place with those two first. That just help you to hold it up. Otherwise, you know, it was still a little bit of a dancing act to do that, but it's just an awkward piece to be doing by yourself. So now I'm driving all these rivets, and this piece is just so snug. It's like, you know, a very taut string. It just kind of has that sound when you like ding ding, you know. And so it's a very solid piece, especially with all those rivets, ain't going anywhere. And so I used kind of the red area on the inner side of the fender as my guide to line everything up. So those rivets are all set in place, which is great because now that gives us a good guide on where and how to kind of line up the main side skirt piece. So again, take those two screws out on the rear and front part of the rocker panel, and then get the side skirt kind of mocked in place. I had to hold the front part up with my foot. It will just flex down, so you can do that too. And then you loosely drive these in. Do not cinch them all the way down, or else you're going to be in a world of hurt trying to get this thing lined up correctly with that rear piece that you just mounted to the wheel well. So then once you do that, just kind of slowly drive those things in, and then you can see it kind of droops down. I tried my best doing a one-man show here to hold this thing up and then get the front one installed as well. So just trying to get that thing lined up, and then again lightly driving it in with my electric screwdriver there, and that'll help you to get it set in place. So then the next challenge is to make sure the rear of the side skirt actually sits flush with that piece you mounted to the rear wheel well. You don't want a big gap there, or else it's going to look horrible. That you want that to be flush as much as possible. So while kind of pulling back on it, and again, this is why I left those two screws loose, that allows you to kind of slide the whole piece back. And then there's 3 fastener locations to mount that rear piece to the side skirt. Again, I think they intend you to use self-tapping screws, but when you have access to both sides of where the screw goes in, I don't like using self-tappers. Same thing, the reason why I use through bolts and lock nuts on the front splitter. You have access to all bolts on the front splitter on both sides. And so I use just a standard machine screw and a flange nut instead of a washer on the back side to help distribute the load. So just repeating the same thing on this side, so taking those 2 screws out, getting the side skirt roughly mocked in place, and then installing those 3 fasteners on the lower part of that rear mounting area. And because I didn't have any nylock lock nuts, I used a little bit of blue Loctite just to make sure those didn't back out with vibrations over time. So just got some, I think these were 1032 with some flange nuts with some serrations on them, and then those just had to up the holes a little bit in size to get these to go through, but then just kind of popped them through, held it in place to make sure the main side skirt piece was flush with that rear fender arch extension, I guess is what we should call it. And then just hand threaded on the nut, and then used hand tools to get those nice and cinched tightly. So you can see that's what it looks like there. I might go back in and touch those up with some black paint. You can see those, they're kind of exposed with the wheel on, so if I had black fasteners I would have used that, but that's what the other side looks like with the nut. So you can see just mounted nice and firmly in place. So now the next step is where I ran into some challenges here. So there's a bunch of hole locations for fasteners that are kind of up at an angle, going at an angle into the rocker, and then there's a bunch of fasteners that go just straight up from the bottom into the car. And I tried using the self-tappers. The self-tappers should work for these bolts going in at an angle, which you can see here. But what I noticed was they were a little long, and I think they were actually bottoming out on the frame rail on the inside part of the rocker panel. So because of that, and I tried using rivets on some of these, but I had some of the rivets actually pull through the fiberglass because I think the pull force strength on the rivet was too much. So I went and got my own self-tappers. They were a bigger thread size because I had kind of already gotten the hole a little bit on the larger side from some of these tests that I had to do. And I was already drilling holes into the car anyway, so it was like, what's the difference to make the hole slightly bigger than it already was? So I got some beefier self-tappers from McMaster Car, and they have a flange head on them, so they distribute the load nice. And then I also just threw a little bit, oh yeah, so here's what you can see, and they even have a rubber grommet to help kind of squish them up against the side skirt a little bit. So these are the ones I'm going to be installing, and they're shorter as well, so none of them bottomed out onto the frame rail. And they're also a hex connection. The self-tappers that come with the kit are Phillips, and I really hate Phillips screws. If you're going to do a screw that isn't a hex, please do a star, or even an Allen. Phillips screws are just, not fun to deal with. So this is me kind of drilling in a small pilot hole and then driving in those self-tappers. Again, I wanted to use rivets along the entire length of the side skirt here, but I kept having issues with the rivet pulling through. I'm not sure if maybe I used a little bit too big of a rivet, so the pull force strength for that rivet was a little bit too great for the fiberglass in this area. I had the rivets hold some areas of the side skirt okay with no problems, but then use those self-tappers in other areas. And EOS recommends using double-sided tape on the completely flat surfaces, but I used rivets in that area as well, but you had to drill some holes, so just be mindful of that. So here's one thing I noticed after I got it installed. I thought I had lined up the kind of fender arch, rear fender liner or wheel well extension piece, I don't know whatever we want to call it. So it's very snugly installed in this clip, which is kind of what I'm showing. But what you can see very clearly are these fasteners going up into the rocker panel. So I don't know if that was a mistake on my end. It happened on both sides. Both sides are like that, which is what I'm showing here. So I'm trying to show this to you guys to, see if you can avoid making this. But I ended up, solving the problem. later in the video here, and it looks great. So I don't know if this entire side skirt needed to shift inboard a little bit more so that didn't happen, but the way the side skirt lined up with that rear wheel well fender arch extension piece, it lined up perfectly, and that piece I lined up with all of the red areas where the rocker panel mounts to the wheel well. So I was a little confused why so much of the fasteners were exposed. So you can see the alignment there is pretty much spot on with the red rocker panel. So, and then I lined up the entire side skirt with that fender arch extension piece, and so I was really kind of confused why you could see all those bolts. And maybe it's because the self tappers they provide with the kit are black, and you don't see them as easily as the kind of galvanized or plated ones that I got. So just keep that in mind if you're installing these. You know, I've seen some people use rivets, and so I used just self tappers in that area where I couldn't use rivets. I tried to rivet it in as many places as possible that actually held the rivet, and if the rivet pulled through, then I just went up in size to the larger self tapper that I showed you guys. And I put a little bit of just adhesive on the self tapper as I was driving it in to make sure it doesn't back out. If I ever have to do body work on the rocker panel, that's a problem for future Andrew. So what am I doing to kind of close up that gap to hide those fasteners? Because I definitely didn't like the look of that. Well, is a best friend sometimes of a contractor is silicone. So got some black all-weather silicone. I had to do this actually on my Mercedes when I installed the rear diffuser and front splitter on that car. So I just filled it with some black silicone, and then I 3D printed a little kind of silicone caulking spreader tool, and then smoothed it out. And now, unless you look really closely and I tell you that it's there, you probably wouldn't even notice. So problem solved in my eyes. And this car is not perfect. It's got scratches on it. It's meant to be a driver. It's not a showroom garage clean. So if it's a little rough in certain areas, no biggie. But just keep that in mind if you're installing these on your car. Just watch out for that alignment. So now getting the car back on the ground to show you guys what the whole kind of suite of aesthetic aero kit pieces look like on the ground instead of floating in the air. Overall, I'm really happy with these. Had a little bit of issues with the fasteners, but was able to solve that with some silicone. So you can see here, you can see the bead of silicone, but it really just kind of blends in with the car. Nothing I'm not used to. Like I said, I had to do that on my previous car because there's some alignment and kind of just manufacturing fit up challenges. So, but pieces overall held together great. Sturdy pieces, I'd say if you accidentally stepped on it, it's not going to break. It's very snugly installed, and it's not going anywhere. I would argue, I think there were, I would say 20 fasteners just on the main side skirt piece alone, plus another 6 on that rear fender arch extension piece. And overall, I think these are really clean. They have a subtle kind of look to them, nothing too crazy. And it just adds a little bit of aftermarket pizzazz to the car that you don't get over stock. And it kind of gives it a slightly more modified and customized look, kind of like you see on like the ZR1 cars and the newer cars and things like that with the Z06 kind of aero kits. So I think I'm really happy with this overall. I'm excited, with the way the car looks now. It looks even better, and just slowly upgrading this thing to modify it and make it my own. So if you guys have any comments or questions about the side skirts or even the front splitter, go check out that video as well. But leave a comment or question below, and I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you guys for tuning into the video. Hope you're enjoying all the Corvette content. A lot more coming down the pipe here, including a lot more 3D printed products I've got for the car that I sell on my Etsy store. So look out for that as well. So thanks all for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one.